Let me just get a tonga and we'll be on our way, he said, and began walking down the street. In a few minutes he was back, sitting in the back of a horse-drawn cart. He lifted her luggage into the vehicle and they were off. "What do you do here, Bertie?" Lords asked, as the cart began crossing the Ganges over a narrow bridge. "I beg," Bertie replied. "Pardon?" "I beg," he repeated. "You beg?" she asked, as his blonde mop of hair nodded back his agreement. "I came here and saw all these people with no money," Bertie began, "and it just flashed on me that I must give all of mine away and live like them. It was so cosmic." "You're in this country with no money?" "None," he said proudly. "I rely on God to feed me." "And those were the people who you gave your money to?" Lords asked, referring to the other beggars. "They are my monk brothers. It's an ancient Hindu custom for the sadhus to pray and meditate and for the people to feed them. This way everyone earns good karma. It's a win-win situation." Lords now saw Bertie in a totally new light. His amiable, tanned face was the smiling look of an idiot. Lords gazed down at her luggage, seemingly the only sane thing around her. She sat back on the tonga's plastic seat and said nothing more. She watched passively as the cart began to climb up a hillside. Bertie was fidgeting with a string of beads, and Lords felt a migraine coming on. A short while later, the tonga turned off the main road and onto an even more rutted one. They then stopped in front of a square concrete building surrounded by high grass. Was this pathetic shack where Robert wanted to spend the rest of his life? Bertie carried her luggage over to the building. "Robert should be here soon," he told her, climbing back into the cart. "Good luck, Mrs. Marty." Lords watched as the tonga headed away and then walked to the side of the building. From there, she could look down at the Ganges below here. "Just like home," she said ironically, thinking of their apartment overlooking the Hudson River. A few minutes later, she heard Robert call out her name. "Robert!" she exclaimed, running toward him. She hugged him and felt all the misery of this miserable trip behind her. Robert looked good. Even Ginsberg's turquoise necklace looked good on his tanned chest. "So good to see you. You're one of the few comforting things around here," Lord said, chuckling at her own words. "Good to see you too," Robert replied. "And welcome to the third world." "How is everything?" she asked. "Great, I love it here. Let me show you your digs." They walked by a narrow slit of a window and opened a door on the side of the building. "I've been working on it a bit." Lords peered in. On one bare wall was a poster that read, "In some places in India, you can still expect a royal reception. Holiday Inn, Bombay." There was a charpoy, an Indian-styled bed frame with rope cords functioning as a mattress. Next to it was a kerosene lantern with a banged-up copy of Oliver Twist lying next to it. Lords despondently surveyed the room, smiling weakly at him. "Oh, Robert, it is good to see you," she said, joining him on the charpoy. "Everyone's been asking about you, so now I'll be able to give them a detailed report." He nodded. "And you guys have made it official?" Lords lifted her bare ring finger as a look of pain flickered across his face. "How's Uncle Jack doing?" he asked. "New month, new babe," she replied, as though she were talking to one of her woman friends. "I'm sorry," Lord said, noticing Robert's reaction. "That wasn't called for. He's okay." "Well, tell me about New York." Lords proceeded to tell him about his friends and relatives, but after she had finished with all the froth, a sort of tense silence engulfed them. "Robert, do you know why I've come all this way?" she finally began. "I've a pretty good idea," he replied. "You've done this thing, given yourself some space. Now it's time to get back to the real world," she said bluntly. "So this is unreal?" Robert asked, shaking his head as Lord sighed loudly. "Robert, I love you and I want you to come home," Lord said, employing her much-rehearsed mission statement. "Home," Robert mused, shaking his head. "We'll talk about it more in the morning." With that, He walked out of the room, closing the door after him. Lourdes opened up her suitcase and took out a jar of peanut butter and some crackers. She then began morosely layering the crackers with peanut butter. She ate her snack without gusto, feeling a bleak mood coming on. When this kind of darkness would hit her in New York, she would go down to the Union Square Cafe, have one of their chocolate suicide cakes, and then come back home in a hypoglycemic stupor. But in Rishikesh, she was reduced to mere peanut butter gluttony. Meanwhile, outside, Robert paced by the road, feeling his head in some sort of tight vice. He now looked at himself as an only child times 2, once when his parents died, and now with the divorce. Maybe because of that, he had always felt at the center of a raging battle between his aunt and uncle for his affection. And since their marriage had fallen apart, it had only gotten worse. Robert sighed. He knew his aunt thought that what he was doing was all madness and that New York was the center of the world, but his truth was different. And with that in his mind, he went back to the ashram and got his sleeping bag. Then he brought it out to the main road and waited for Baba's return. A few hours later, he was awakened by some voices. He opened his eyes and saw 2 lamps barely outlining an approaching Tunga. "Hello," Robert called out. "Is that the thin one?" Robert heard an Indian voice ask, and Baba answer, "Yeah." "Hey, Robert," Alan called out. Robert walked over to the Tunga. "Robert, this is Kadam," Baba said, introducing a squat-looking Indian to him. "Hello," Robert said, shaking the man's hand as the cart slowly made its way over the rutted path. "Robert loves to eat, and Kadam is a master cook," Baba said. "He has served my family for years and has come to cook for us. Your aunt is here?" "Yeah." The Tunga pulled in front of the ashram, and Baba got off. "Make it work," Baba told Robert, patting him on the cheek. "Make it perfect." With that, they began unloading the supplies from the Tunga. Throughout all the racket, Lourdes remained steadfastly in her room, with only one thought in mind: how she would now deal with this Indian snake oil salesman who had stolen her child.